In a busy city where tensions between the police and minority communities were always simmering, an unexpected incident unfolded one evening. It was the kind of story that would make people stop and think, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and justice. This is how it all began. A tale that started with a simple walk, but ended up shaking the very foundation of trust between law enforcement and the public. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of a lively urban neighborhood. Judge Marcus Thompson, a well-respected federal judge in his late 40s, stepped out of his apartment building after a long day at work. Known for his sharp mind, fairness, and dedication to upholding the law, Judge Thompson was admired by many. That evening, however, he wasn't dressed in his usual formal attire. Instead, he wore a pair of faded blue jeans, a plain black hoodie, and comfortable sneakers. His goal was simple: take a quiet stroll through his neighborhood to unwind. As he walked along the sidewalk, Judge Thompson enjoyed the cool breeze brushing against his face. He passed by small shops, glowing streetlights, and groups of people chatting casually on their porches. It was just another ordinary night, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that two rookie police officers were patrolling the same area, their minds clouded by stereotypes they weren't even aware they held. Earlier that day, these officers, Officer Ryan Carter and Officer Mike Dawson, had received reports of recent petty crimes in the neighborhood. A few cell phones had been stolen, and someone had broken into a parked car. Though no clear description of the suspect existed beyond vague details like male and wearing dark clothing, the officers felt pressure to act quickly. Both men were relatively new to the force, eager to prove themselves, but lacking experience in handling nuanced situations. Their training had emphasized following protocol, but it hadn't prepared them for dealing with implicit biases or understanding the impact of their actions on innocent civilians. As they drove slowly down the street, scanning the area for anything suspicious, their eyes landed on Judge Thompson. To them, he looked out of place. His casual clothes and relaxed demeanor seemed unusual for this part of town, especially at night. The fact that he was black only amplified their suspicions. Without realizing it, Officer Carter and Officer Dawson let their preconceived notions guide their judgment. They decided to pull over and investigate. Judge Thompson noticed the flashing red and blue lights behind him almost immediately. At first, he assumed there must be some sort of emergency nearby and moved closer to the curb to give the patrol car space. But when the vehicle stopped directly behind him and the officers stepped out, his confusion grew. Why were they approaching him? Had something happened? "Excuse me, sir," Officer Carter called out, his voice firm but not yet aggressive. "Can you stop right there?" Judge Thompson did as he was told, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Is everything okay?" he asked calmly, his tone polite and measured. "We need you to stay still." Officer Dawson interjected, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. "What are you doing here?" "I live around the corner," Judge Thompson replied, gesturing vaguely toward his apartment building. "I was just taking a walk." But the officers weren't convinced. Something about his appearance made them uneasy. Maybe it was the hoodie, which reminded them of descriptions they'd heard during briefings. Or maybe it was the color of his skin, triggering unconscious biases they couldn't articulate. Whatever the reason, they decided to dig deeper. "Do you have any ID on you?" Officer Carter demanded, stepping closer. "Yes, I do," Judge Thompson said, reaching into his pocket slowly to avoid alarming them. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. The card clearly displayed his name, address, and photo, but the officers barely glanced at it. Instead, they focused on their own assumptions, refusing to believe that this man could be anything other than what they suspected: a criminal. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," Officer Dawson said, though he struggled to explain exactly what that description was. "We'll need to bring you in for questioning." Judge Thompson frowned, sensing that things were escalating unnecessarily. "Look, I'm telling you the truth," he insisted. "I'm just a resident here. You can verify my information if you'd like." But the officers weren't listening anymore. Their minds were already made up. Handcuffs came out, and within moments, Judge Thompson found himself being led to the back seat of the patrol car. As the door slammed shut behind him, he sat in stunned silence, wondering how this could possibly be happening. For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, the arrest felt routine. They believed they were doing their job, protecting the community from potential threats. What they failed to consider, however, was the weight of their decision and the identity of the man now sitting in their cruiser. Little did they know, this seemingly ordinary encounter would soon spiral into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, bystanders who witnessed the scene exchanged worried glances. Some recognized Judge Thompson as a familiar face, while others whispered about the growing tension between the police and residents. No one realized yet that this moment would spark a national conversation about race, authority, and accountability. For now, it was just another arrest, or so it seemed. As the patrol car sped away, Judge Thompson stared out the window, his thoughts racing. How could this happen? Would anyone believe him? And more importantly, what would come next? Unbeknownst to everyone involved, the events of that night were about to change lives forever. The patrol car rolled through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, its tires humming against the asphalt. Inside the back seat, Judge Marcus Thompson sat in silence, his hands cuffed behind him. He stared out the window at the passing houses and lampposts, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like he was trapped in someone else's nightmare. His mind raced with questions. How could this happen? Why hadn't they listened when he explained who he was? Was it because of how he dressed? Or was it something deeper, more insidious? Officer Ryan Carter drove while Officer Mike Jackson sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at their suspect. To them, this was just another routine arrest. They convinced themselves that they were following procedure, doing their duty as law enforcement officers. But beneath their confident exterior, doubt gnawed at them. Something about the man in the back seat didn't add up. His calm demeanor and articulate speech seemed out of place for someone they assumed was a criminal. Still, pride and fear kept them from reconsidering their actions. At the precinct, the atmosphere was chaotic. Officers bustled around, answering calls, typing reports, and dealing with various cases. When the patrol car pulled into the parking lot, Judge Thompson was escorted inside. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across the room. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paperwork. As he entered, heads turned toward him briefly before returning to their tasks. No one paid much attention. Arrests were a daily occurrence here. Judge Thompson was led to a small holding area where other detainees waited. Some looked angry, others scared, but most seemed resigned to their fate. For a man accustomed to presiding over courtrooms, being treated like a common criminal was jarring. Yet despite the indignity of the situation, he remained composed. He knew panicking wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on finding a way to resolve the misunderstanding. "Listen," Judge Thompson said firmly to the officer standing nearby. "You need to call my lawyer. Or better yet, check my credentials again. I'm not who you think I am." The officer shrugged dismissively. "We'll get to that," he muttered, clearly uninterested in listening further. Minutes ticked by slowly. Judge Thompson grew increasingly frustrated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a sergeant approached. Sergeant Linda Hayes was a seasoned officer with years of experience under her belt. She had heard about the arrest and decided to investigate personally. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking directly at Judge Thompson. There was a sharpness in her tone, but also curiosity. "I'm Judge Marcus Thompson," he replied evenly, meeting her gaze. "I don't know why I'm being held, but I assure you there's been a grave mistake." Sergeant Hayes raised an eyebrow. She'd seen plenty of people claim false identities to avoid trouble, so skepticism came naturally. Still, something about his demeanor caught her attention. He spoke with authority, his voice steady and unwavering. Not many people could maintain such composure in this situation. "Do you have any ID?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, I gave it to the officers earlier," Judge Thompson responded. "They took my driver's license. You can verify it if you want." Sergeant Hayes nodded and motioned for one of the officers to retrieve the ID. A few tense moments later, the card was handed to her. She examined it closely, noting the name and address. Then, using her computer, she cross-referenced the information with official records. What she found left her stunned. Her fingers froze over the keyboard as the screen displayed Judge Marcus Thompson's profile. Federal judge, years of service. Awards and recognitions listed prominently. This wasn't some random civilian. They had arrested a sitting federal judge. Panic surged through her veins as the weight of the situation sank in. "Oh no," she whispered under her breath, shaking her head. Turning to Judge Thompson, she apologized profusely. "Sir, I'm so sorry. We didn't realize—" "It's clear you didn't," Judge Thompson replied dryly, though his tone wasn't accusatory. "Now can we please end this farce and uncuff me?" Sergeant Hayes immediately ordered the handcuffs removed. Word spread quickly among the staff, and soon whispers filled the room. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say or... For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, the realization hit hardest. Their mistake wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. Meanwhile, Judge Thompson refused to let anger consume him. Though humiliated and frustrated, he understood the broader implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about him. It was a reflection of systemic issues within law enforcement. Prejudices, whether conscious or unconscious, had led to his wrongful arrest. And if it could happen to him, a respected federal judge, what hope did ordinary citizens have? As the night wore on, efforts began to contain the fallout. Senior officials were notified, and damage control became the top priority. Apologies flowed freely, but Judge Thompson knew words weren't enough. He demanded accountability, not just for himself, but for everyone affected by similar injustices. By morning, news of the incident had leaked to the press. Reporters swarmed outside the precinct, eager to uncover details. Protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for all and end racial profiling." Social media erupted with outrage, hashtags trending nationwide. Videos surfaced of bystanders recounting what they had witnessed, fueling public anger even further. For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, the backlash was overwhelming. Their names were plastered across headlines, and their faces appeared on television screens. Calls for their dismissal grew louder each day. One of them tried to defend their actions, claiming they were simply doing their job. "We thought he matched the description," Officer Carter argued weakly during an interview. But his explanation fell flat, dismissed as an excuse rather than a justification. Judge Thompson watched the chaos unfold from afar. Though he appreciated the support pouring in, he didn't want the focus to shift entirely onto him. In interviews, he emphasized the need for reform rather than retribution. "This isn't about punishing individuals," he stated calmly. "It's about addressing the root causes of these problems. We need better training, greater accountability, and a commitment to treating everyone equally under the law." His words resonated deeply, earning praise from activists, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens alike. Yet the road ahead remained uncertain. Would this incident lead to meaningful change? Or would it fade into memory like so many others before it? Only time would tell. As the days passed, Judge Thompson returned to his normal routine, though the experience lingered in his mind. Every courtroom appearance reminded him of the power dynamics at play, and the responsibility he carried as a figure of authority. He vowed to use his platform to advocate for justice, ensuring that his ordeal wasn't in vain. Back at the precinct, tensions ran high. Officers walked on eggshells, aware that the world was watching. Discussions about implicit bias and cultural sensitivity dominated meetings. New policies were proposed, though implementing them would take time. For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, life became unbearable. Isolated by colleagues and vilified by the public, they struggled to cope with the consequences of their actions. And so, the story continued to unfold, a stark reminder of how prejudice could blind even those sworn to uphold the law. It was a lesson nobody involved would soon forget, sparking conversations that reached far beyond the confines of the city where it all began. The morning after Judge Marcus Thompson's arrest, the city awoke to chaos. News outlets broke the story with explosive headlines. Federal judge wrongfully arrested by police. Racial profiling scandal rocks city. And justice system under fire. Social media platforms lit up like wildfire as people shared their outrage, disbelief, and calls for accountability. For many, this was more than just an isolated incident. It was proof of systemic issues that had long plagued law enforcement and the justice system. At the heart of the storm stood Judge Thompson himself. Despite the humiliation he endured, he remained remarkably composed. He understood the significance of his position and the platform it gave him. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been wrongfully targeted because of the color of their skin or how they dressed. As reporters flocked to his doorstep seeking comment, he chose his words carefully. "I am not here to seek revenge," Judge Thompson said during a brief press conference outside his apartment building. "What happened to me should never happen to anyone else. My goal now is to ensure that real change comes from this unfortunate event." His calm demeanor and focus on solutions earned widespread admiration. Protesters rallying outside the police station chanted his name, holding signs that read, "Justice for Judge Thompson," and "No more racial profiling." Civil rights organizations praised his grace under pressure, while community leaders urged citizens to channel their anger into productive action. The incident became a rallying cry for those fighting against systemic racism and inequality. Meanwhile, inside the police department, panic spread like a virus. Sergeant Linda Hayes, who had uncovered the truth about Judge Thompson's identity, scrambled to contain the damage. She called an emergency meeting with senior officials, including the police chief, to discuss next steps. Everyone knew this was a PR nightmare, and potentially a legal one too. "We need to act fast," Chief Robert Alvarez said, pacing back and forth in the conference room. "This isn't just about bad press, it's about public trust. If we don't handle this properly, we risk losing the community's faith entirely." The officers involved, Ryan Carter and Mike Dawson, were summoned to the chief's office. Both men looked pale and shaken, their confidence shattered. They sat stiffly in chairs, avoiding eye contact as Chief Alvarez addressed them. "You two have put us in an impossible situation," he said sternly. "Do you realize what you've done? You arrested a federal judge, a man sworn to uphold the very laws you're supposed to enforce. Do you understand the gravity of your mistake?" Officer Carter tried to defend himself. "Chief, we were just doing our job," he stammered. "We got a report of a suspect matching his description and we followed protocol." "Protocol?" Chief Alvarez interrupted, slamming his fist on the table. "Protocol doesn't mean blindly arresting someone based on stereotypes. Where was your common sense, your training? Did it ever occur to you to actually listen when he identified himself?" Officer Dawson chimed in nervously. "We didn't think he was telling the truth. His clothes, his appearance, it all fit the vague description we had." Their excuses only fueled the chief's frustration. "That's exactly the problem," he snapped. "You let your biases dictate your actions instead of relying on facts. And now, thanks to your incompetence, we're facing a national scandal." The officers hung their heads in shame, realizing there was no way to justify their behavior. They had made a catastrophic error, one that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. In response to the growing outcry, the police department launched an internal investigation. Every aspect of the arrest was scrutinized, from the initial stop to the decision to take Judge Thompson into custody. Body cam footage revealed disturbing details. The dismissive tone the officers used when speaking to him, their refusal to verify his credentials properly, and their reliance on flimsy evidence to justify detaining him. The video quickly went viral, further fueling public anger. Civil rights groups seized the opportunity to demand sweeping reforms. Leaders from organizations like the NAACP and ACLU held joint press conferences, calling for stricter accountability measures and mandatory diversity training for all law enforcement personnel. "This is not an isolated incident," one activist declared passionately. "It's a symptom of a much larger disease, a culture of bias and discrimination that has infected our institutions for far too long." Lawmakers also weighed in, introducing bills aimed at addressing racial profiling and improving transparency within police departments. Some proposed creating independent oversight boards to review cases of misconduct, while others advocated for increased funding for community policing initiatives. The debate grew heated, with supporters arguing that reform was long overdue, and critics claiming such measures would undermine law enforcement effectiveness. Amidst the turmoil, Judge Thompson continued to advocate for change rather than punishment. In interviews, he emphasized the importance of education and empathy in combating prejudice. These officers aren't inherently bad people, he explained. They're products of a flawed system. Instead of focusing solely on blame, we need to ask ourselves, how can we prevent this from happening again? What steps can we take to build trust between the police and the communities they serve? His message resonated deeply, earning praise, even from some unlikely quarters. Conservative commentators, typically resistant to discussions of systemic racism, acknowledged the validity of his arguments. If a federal judge can be treated this way, imagine what ordinary citizens face, one columnist wrote. It's time to confront the uncomfortable truths about bias in law enforcement. For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, life became unbearable. Once proud members of the force, they were now pariahs. Their colleagues distanced themselves, fearing association with the disgraced pair. Friends stopped answering their calls, and family members struggled to defend them. Public shaming took its toll. Both men began experiencing anxiety attacks and sleepless nights. They sought counseling, but found little relief. The weight of their mistake pressed down on them relentlessly, as, part of the investigation, disciplinary hearings were scheduled to determine their fate. Would they lose their jobs, face criminal charges, or receive a lesser punishment such as suspension or reassignment? Speculation ran rampant, with opinions divided. Some argued that firing them would send a strong message about accountability, while others believed second chances were necessary to foster growth and learning. Judge Thompson, however, refused to participate in the vilification of the officers. During a televised interview, he expressed sympathy for their predicament. I don't condone what they did, but I recognize that they are human beings capable of making mistakes, he said thoughtfully. What matters most is what happens next. Will they learn from this experience? Will the department implement changes to prevent future incidents? That's where our focus should be. His compassion surprised many, including the officers themselves. Though still consumed by guilt, Carter and Dawson admitted that his forgiveness gave them hope. Perhaps redemption was possible if they committed to self-reflection and growth. Back-E. In the community, tensions simmered but showed signs of easing. Town hall meetings brought residents and law enforcement officials together to discuss ways to rebuild trust. Judge Thompson attended several of these gatherings, using his influence to bridge divides. His presence inspired open dialogue, encouraging both sides to listen and learn from each other. By the end of the week, the initial shock of the arrest had begun to subside, but its impact lingered. Conversations about race, bias, and justice dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces across the nation. People realized that Judge Thompson's ordeal wasn't just a story, it was a mirror reflecting societal flaws that needed fixing, and so as the dust settled, one thing became clear. The wrongful arrest of Judge Marcus Thompson had ignited a movement. It exposed deep-seated prejudices, sparked demands for reform, and challenged everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But it also offered a glimmer of hope, that through courage, compassion, and collective effort, meaningful change was possible. The days following Judge Marcus Thompson's wrongful arrest saw an eruption of public outrage that rippled across the nation. What began as a local scandal quickly escalated into a national conversation about systemic racism, police misconduct, and the need for accountability within law enforcement. The story dominated headlines, talk shows, and social media feeds, sparking heated debates in living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces. For many, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the deep inequalities embedded in society. Protests erupted outside the police station where Judge Thompson had been detained. Hundreds of people gathered holding signs that read, Justice Over Bias, Black Lives Matter, and Accountability Now. Some protesters chanted his name, while others shared personal stories of being racially profiled or mistreated by law enforcement. The crowd swelled with each passing hour, drawing activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who felt compelled to stand up against injustice. Social media played a pivotal role in amplifying the movement. Hashtags like #Justice for Judge Thompson and $End Racial Profiling trended nationwide, accompanied by posts calling for reform. Videos of bystanders recounting what they witnessed during the arrest went viral, further fueling public anger. One clip showed Judge Thompson calmly explaining his identity to the officers, only to be ignored. Another captured the moment he was handcuffed and led to the patrol car, his face etched with disbelief. These images struck a chord with viewers, forcing them to confront the harsh realities faced by marginalized communities. Civil rights organizations seized the opportunity to push for change. Leaders from groups like the NAACP, ACLU, and Black Lives Matter held joint press conferences, demanding immediate action. "This is not just about one judge," said Angela Davis, a prominent civil rights attorney, during a televised address. "It's about every person who has ever been judged not by their character, but by the color of their skin. We cannot allow this pattern of discrimination to continue." Lawmakers also joined the chorus, introducing legislation aimed at addressing racial profiling and improving transparency within police departments. Bills proposing stricter accountability measures, mandatory diversity training, and independent oversight boards gained traction in state houses and Congress. Debates grew intense, with supporters arguing that reform was long overdue, and critics claiming such measures would hinder effective policing. Despite the resistance, momentum for change was undeniable. Amidst the chaos, Judge Thompson remained a steady voice of reason. He attended rallies and town hall meetings, using his platform to advocate for meaningful solutions rather than retribution. During one emotional gathering, he addressed a packed auditorium, urging people to channel their anger into productive action. "I understand your frustration," he said, his voice filled with empathy. "But yelling and pointing fingers won't fix the problem. We need to work together, law enforcement, lawmakers, and citizens, to create a system that treats everyone fairly." His words resonated deeply, earning admiration even from those initially skeptical of his approach. Critics of reform admitted that his calm demeanor and focus on unity made it hard to dismiss his arguments. "If a federal judge can forgive those who wronged him, maybe we can find common ground too," remarked a conservative commentator on a popular news program. Such sentiments helped bridge divides, encouraging open dialogue between opposing sides. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on the police department to take decisive action. Chief Robert Alvarez faced mounting calls to resign, with critics accusing him of failing to address systemic issues within his ranks. Protesters chanted slogans like "Fire the Chief" and "No Justice, No Peace" outside his office, while petitions demanding his removal garnered thousands of signatures online. Though Alvarez resisted stepping down, he acknowledged the need for sweeping reforms. In a televised statement, he vowed to implement new policies aimed at combating bias and fostering trust with the community. The disciplinary hearings for officers Ryan Carter and Mike Dawson became a focal point of the controversy. Both men were suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, but their fate remained uncertain. Supporters of reform argued that firing them would send a strong message about accountability, while others believed second chances were necessary to encourage growth. The debate raged on, with opinions divided along ideological lines. During the hearings, body cam footage of the arrest was played publicly for the first time. The video revealed damning evidence of the officers' prejudiced behavior, their dismissive tone, refusal to verify Judge Thompson's credentials, and reliance on vague descriptions to justify detaining him. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as spectators watched the footage, shocked by the blatant disregard for proper procedure. Civil rights advocates hailed the release of the video as a turning point, hoping it would galvanize support for reform. Officer Carter and Officer Dawson sat silently throughout the proceedings, visibly shaken by the backlash. Once confident, Rookies eager to prove themselves, they now appeared defeated and remorseful. Their testimonies offered little defense. Both admitted they had acted on assumptions rather than facts. "I thought I was doing my job," Carter said softly, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Dawson echoed similar sentiments, adding, "We messed up. There's no excuse for what we did. All I can do now is learn from this and try to make things right." Their admissions failed to quell public anger, but Judge Thompson's response surprised many. In an interview shortly after the hearings, he expressed sympathy for the officers, acknowledging their humanity. "They made a terrible mistake, but they're not monsters," he said. "What matters most is whether they, and the department, take steps to ensure this never happens again." His compassion sparked mixed reactions. Some praised him for rising above bitterness, while others accused him of being too lenient. Regardless, his stance inspired reflection, prompting many to consider the importance of forgiveness and redemption in driving societal progress. As the weeks passed, the initial wave of protests began to subside, replaced by quieter yet equally impactful efforts. Community meetings brought residents and law enforcement officials together to discuss ways to rebuild trust. Judge Thompson participated actively, facilitating discussions and encouraging both sides to listen and learn from each other. His presence fostered openness, helping break down barriers that had long divided them. Educational initiatives also gained momentum. Schools incorporated lessons on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity into their curricula, while businesses hosted workshops for employees. Nonprofit organizations launched campaigns to raise awareness about racial profiling, distributing resources to help individuals recognize and combat prejudice. Slowly but surely, the seeds of change began taking root. Yet challenges persisted. Skeptics questioned whether these efforts would lead to lasting transformation or fade away once the spotlight shifted elsewhere. Would lawmakers follow through on proposed reforms? Would police departments genuinely embrace accountability or merely pay lip service to appease critics? These uncertainties loomed large, casting doubt over the future. Despite the obstacles, Judge Thompson remained optimistic. He understood that change wouldn't happen overnight, but he believed the events of that fateful night had planted the seeds of progress. By shining a light on systemic flaws, his ordeal had forced society to confront uncomfortable truths and inspired countless individuals to demand better. And so, as the dust settled, one thing became clear. The wrongful arrest of Judge Marcus Thompson had ignited a movement. It exposed deep-seated prejudices, sparked demands for reform, and challenged everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But it also offered a glimmer of hope that through courage, compassion, and collective effort, meaningful change was possible. In the weeks following the wrongful arrest of Judge Marcus Thompson, the nation waited with bated breath to see how justice would be served. The disciplinary hearings for officers Ryan Carter and Mike Dawson reached their climax, drawing widespread attention from the media and the public. Every detail of the case was dissected: body cam footage, witness testimonies, internal reports, all pointing to a glaring failure in judgment by the officers involved. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet profound. What punishment would fit the crime? The hearings took place in a packed courtroom, with reporters crammed into every available seat and cameras rolling outside. Inside, tension hung thick in the air. Officer Carter and Officer Dawson sat side by side at the defense table, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. They had already admitted their mistakes during earlier testimonies, but now they faced the final verdict that would determine their futures. Chief Robert Alvarez presided over the proceedings, flanked by members of the Police Oversight Committee. His face was grim as he reviewed the evidence one last time before delivering his decision. "Officers Carter and Dawson," he began, his voice firm and measured, "your actions on the night of Judge Marcus Thompson's arrest were unacceptable. You allowed implicit biases to cloud your judgment, resulting in the unlawful detention of a respected federal judge. Such behavior undermines public trust and tarnishes the reputation of this department." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he continued, "As law enforcement officers, you are entrusted with immense power and responsibility. When that trust is broken, there must be consequences. Therefore, effective immediately, both of you are terminated from the force. Your conduct has proven you unfit to wear the badge." The room erupted in murmurs. Some attendees clapped quietly, while others exchanged knowing glances. For many, the termination felt like a victory, a clear message that accountability mattered. But not everyone agreed. Critics argued that firing the officers wasn't enough. They wanted criminal charges filed against them. Civil rights groups pushed for further legal action, insisting that true justice required more than just losing a job. Judge Thompson, who chose not to attend the hearing, released a statement shortly afterward. "While I appreciate the steps being taken to hold these officers accountable," he wrote, "my focus remains on systemic change. Terminating 2 individuals does not address the root causes of this issue. We must ensure that no one else suffers the same fate because of prejudice or negligence." His words resonated deeply, shifting the conversation back to broader reforms. Lawmakers seized the opportunity to push forward legislation aimed at preventing future incidents. One bill proposed creating independent oversight boards to review cases of misconduct, while another mandated comprehensive diversity training for all law enforcement personnel. Both measures gained bipartisan support, signaling a rare moment of unity in an otherwise polarized political climate. Meanwhile, the police department scrambled to implement changes internally. Chief Alvarez announced a series of new policies designed to combat racial profiling and improve transparency. These included mandatory bias training, stricter guidelines for making arrests based on vague descriptions, and regular audits of body cam footage to identify problematic behavior. Additionally, the department partnered with community organizations to host town hall meetings, fostering dialogue between officers and residents. For Officer Carter and Officer Dawson, life after termination was bleak. Once proud members of the force, they now found themselves ostracized and struggling to rebuild their lives. Job prospects were slim. Few employers wanted to hire former cops embroiled in scandal. Friends distanced themselves and family members grappled with disappointment and shame. The psychological toll was immense. Both men sought therapy to cope with guilt and anxiety, but healing seemed distant. Despite their struggles, Judge Thompson urged compassion rather than condemnation. In interviews, he emphasized the importance of second chances. "These officers made a grave mistake, but they're human beings capable of growth," he said. "If we truly want to move forward, we need to give people the tools and opportunities to learn from their errors." His stance inspired some to reconsider their views. Community leaders began advocating for restorative justice programs, where former officers could participate in workshops and mentorship initiatives aimed at addressing bias and promoting empathy. While controversial, these efforts sparked hope that redemption was possible, even for those who had caused harm. Back in the neighborhoods where tensions once ran high, signs of progress emerged. Residents reported feeling more comfortable approaching officers, thanks to improved communication and increased visibility of reform efforts. Trust, though fragile, started to rebuild brick by brick. Town hall meetings became collaborative spaces, where citizens and law enforcement worked together to solve problems rather than point fingers. Educational institutions also played a crucial role in driving change. Schools incorporated lessons on systemic racism and cultural sensitivity into their curricula, teaching students to recognize bias early and challenge it constructively. Universities launched research projects examining the impact of policing practices on marginalized communities, providing data-driven insights to inform policy decisions. Businesses followed suit, hosting workshops and seminars for employees to foster inclusivity in the workplace. Social media continued to amplify voices calling for justice. Activists used platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok to share stories, organize protests, and advocate for legislative reform. Hashtags like Toshk Justice Reimagined and Police Accountability gained traction, keeping the conversation alive long after the initial outrage subsided. Online petitions demanding accountability garnered millions of signatures, pressuring lawmakers to act swiftly. Yet, challenges remained. Skeptics questioned whether the reforms would stick or fade away once public attention shifted elsewhere. Would police departments genuinely embrace accountability, or merely pay lip service to appease critics? Would lawmakers follow through on promises of change, or let bills languish in committees? These uncertainties loomed large, casting doubt over the future. Despite the obstacles, Judge Thompson remained steadfast in his optimism. He understood that meaningful change required patience and persistence. By shining a light on systemic flaws, his ordeal had forced society to confront uncomfortable truths and inspired countless individuals to demand better. Whether speaking at conferences, participating in panel discussions, or engaging with community members, he continued to champion the cause of justice for all. And so, as the months passed, the story of Judge Marcus Thompson's wrongful arrest evolved from a tale of injustice into a catalyst for transformation. It exposed deep-seated prejudices, sparked demands for reform, and challenged everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But it also offered a glimmer of hope that through courage, compassion, and collective effort, meaningful change was possible. The road ahead was long, but the journey had begun. Months after the wrongful arrest of Judge Marcus Thompson, the city and the nation had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock and outrage had given way to quieter, more deliberate efforts toward change. While the incident remained fresh in people's minds, it was no longer the sole focus of daily headlines. Instead, it became a reference point, a reminder of how far society still had to go in addressing systemic biases and ensuring justice for all. For Judge Thompson, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. He resumed his duties on the bench, presiding over cases with the same fairness and dedication that had earned him respect long before the arrest. Yet the experience left an indelible mark on him. Each time he entered the courtroom, he carried with him the memory of that night, the humiliation, the disbelief, and the stark realization of how easily power could be misused. It fueled his resolve to use his position not just as a judge, but as an advocate for meaningful reform. One chilly, autumn morning, Judge Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at a national conference on criminal justice reform. The event brought together lawmakers, activists, law enforcement officials, and community leaders, all united by a shared goal: creating a fairer, more equitable system. As he approached the podium, the room fell silent. Everyone knew the story of what had happened to him, and they were eager to hear his perspective. "Good morning," Judge Thompson began, his voice steady and warm. "I want to start by saying this. What happened to me wasn't just about me. It was about every person who has ever been judged, not by their character, actions, or words, but by the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the neighborhood they live in." The audience leaned forward, hanging on his every word. That night I experienced firsthand what so many others have endured silently for years. I was profiled, detained, and treated like a suspect simply because of assumptions. Based on my appearance, it was wrong and it should never happen to anyone. But if there is one silver lining to this ordeal, it's that it forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and gave us an opportunity to make things right. He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Many nodded in agreement, while others scribbled notes furiously. Then he continued, "We cannot fix centuries of inequality overnight, but we can take steps today that will pave the way for a better tomorrow. That starts with accountability, for ourselves, for our institutions, and for those entrusted with protecting us." Judge Thompson went on to outline several key areas where progress was needed. First, he emphasized the importance of education. "Bias isn't born, it's learned," he said. "That means it can also be unlearned. We need comprehensive training programs for law enforcement officers, not just once during their careers but regularly, to help them recognize and overcome implicit biases. And this training shouldn't stop with police departments. It should extend to schools, workplaces, and communities." Next, he called for greater transparency in policing. "Body cameras are a start, but they're not enough," he explained. We need independent oversight boards to review cases of misconduct and ensure accountability. These boards should include representatives from diverse backgrounds, people who understand the struggles faced by marginalized communities and can bring fresh perspectives to the table. Finally, Judge Thompson urged collaboration between law enforcement and the public. Trust is built through dialogue, he said. It's not something that can be imposed. It has to be earned. That's why initiatives like town hall meetings and community policing programs are so important. They give citizens a voice and allow officers to see the human side of the neighborhoods they serve. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as Judge Thompson smiled humbly. For many attendees, his words served as both a call to action and a source of inspiration. Leaders from various sectors pledged to work together to implement his recommendations, knowing that lasting change required collective effort. Back in the city where it all began, signs of progress were evident. The police department had made significant strides in implementing reforms. Mandatory bias training sessions became a regular part of officer development, featuring guest speakers from civil rights organizations and personal testimonies from individuals affected by racial profiling. Body cam footage was reviewed more rigorously, with audits conducted by independent panels to identify patterns of misconduct. Community outreach programs flourished, bringing officers and residents together for activities ranging from youth mentorship initiatives to neighborhood cleanup drives. Residents noticed the difference. Trust, though still fragile, began to rebuild. Conversations that once seemed impossible now flowed freely, fostering understanding and empathy on both sides. Parents felt safer letting their children play outside, knowing that officers were making an effort to connect with the community rather than merely patrol it. Even Officer Ryan Carter and Mike Dawson, whose careers had ended in disgrace, found ways to contribute positively. After months of therapy and self-reflection, they joined a restorative justice program aimed at educating former officers about bias and accountability. Through workshops and mentorship initiatives, they shared their experiences with peers, urging them to learn from their mistakes. It was a small step, but it symbolized hope, that even those who had caused harm could play a role in healing. For Judge Thompson, these changes were heartening, but he remained cautious. He understood that progress was rarely linear and that setbacks were inevitable. Still, he chose to focus on the positives, believing that every small victory brought society closer to true equality. In interviews, he often reflected on the lessons he had learned from the ordeal. This experience taught me that justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, he said. It's about creating systems that uplift everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and treating each other with dignity and respect. His message resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the fight for justice. Students organized rallies on college campuses, demanding curriculum changes to address systemic racism. Employees pressured companies to adopt inclusive hiring practices and create safe spaces for marginalized workers. Artists used their platforms to amplify underrepresented voices, crafting songs, films, and paintings that challenged stereotypes and celebrated diversity. Social media played a crucial role in sustaining momentum. Activists launched campaigns highlighting stories of resilience and triumph, reminding people that change was possible when they worked together. Hashtags like Justice for All and Equity in action trended worldwide, keeping the conversation alive and encouraging global solidarity. Yet, Judge Thompson never lost sight of the bigger picture. He knew that while laws and policies were essential, real transformation began in the hearts and minds of individuals. Change starts with us, he often said. It starts with how we treat each other in our daily lives, with kindness, empathy, and a willingness to listen. If we can do that, then maybe incidents like mine won't happen again. As the years passed, the story of Judge Marcus Thompson's wrongful arrest became a turning point in history, a moment when society paused to reflect on its flaws and commit to doing better. Textbooks included it as a case study in discussions about systemic racism and police reform. Documentaries explored its impact, interviewing everyone from protesters to policymakers to the officers involved. And Judge Thompson himself became a symbol of grace under pressure, proof that courage and compassion could drive meaningful change. Though challenges remained, the groundwork had been laid. Communities across the country embraced the idea that justice wasn't a privilege reserved for a select few. It was a right owed to everyone. Slowly but surely, the seeds planted by Judge Thompson's ordeal began to sprout, growing into a future defined by fairness, accountability, and unity. And so, the tale of Judge Marcus Thompson came full circle, not as a story of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience and hope. It reminded everyone that even in the face of injustice, there was always a chance to rise above, to learn, and to build a world where equality truly knew no bounds.